Mappable USA podcast. This is Ron Costa broadcasting remotely today in the great state of New York. Here bringing you another great Mappable USA podcast where we put you on the map. And folks, we're going to talk a little bit more about crowdfunding, Reg.A, et cetera. I'm going to bring up a fact that on the surface seems like a no-brainer. But there's a lot of controversy on both sides. So we'll get into that a little bit. But before we do, let's bring on Vicky Hutchmala from the World Token Market. Vicky, how are you today?
Oh, I'm excellent today, Ron. I'm so excited because it's going to be 115 in Vegas. And, this is what we live for, hot summers. But I'm more excited about our guest. Our guest is going to give us more insight into how to better use the opportunities of Reg.A. So let's get started.
Exactly. That's one of the reasons why I'm glad that I'm kind of like not in Vegas right now because of what you just said with the weather. But let's get him on right now. Let's talk about Manuj Grover from Plexus Media. You guys might remember him. Manuj, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Ron. Thank you, Vicky, for having me on again. By the way, Vicky, to be honest with you, I'm really happy from your tone of voice that you guys have 115 degrees, but I'm not envious at all. I remember our last call, we were at 50, and you were saying you were close to 90. Then you said, you know what, I wish I was closer to 90. Now we're at 75 to 80, and it's perfect up here, so you can keep your weather.
Yeah, but Manuj, this is why God created swimming pools, so that when it's 115, you can just jump right in.
True, but you do realize that the transfer of heat and energy in physics, the water does warm up. Right?
No,
that's funny. Yeah.
That's why it's great. And if you need any more inducement, you just take a cold beer in there with you, and then you're pretty much in heaven.
Well, okay, no argument from my side.
Well, Manuj, after your last podcast that you were on, got a lot of comments from a lot of people saying that was such a great podcast, and in fact, some people said, you should have Manuj do all your podcasts because it was really, really great. So really happy to have you on again.
Thank you.
Yeah, and today, listen, let's talk a little bit more. Actually, before we do that, again, a really quick overview of your company and what you're doing right now for our audience, in case they didn't miss the last time.
So not a problem. So Plexus, we're a investor-focused digital marketing firm, meaning that we help issuers or companies that are looking to either pre-IPO, get awareness of their stock, or a Reg.A or any type of company doing financial raises. We help them get their story out and attract investor eyeballs. And we're a pure online digital organization. We help companies from basically brainstorm their key messaging, develop investor profiles. So the idea is that, like how you would in any business, trying to identify who your client is, when you're raising capital, you have to identify who your investor would be. Who would be that value investor that would stick with you through thick and thin? So we help in developing those profiles and then build out the distribution tactics to actually get the message out, attract the eyeballs, and eventually, hopefully, help in the conversion of them to long-term shareholders.
No, that sounds excellent. Of course, this podcast, usually we have both investors and issuers always listening and downloading these podcasts. Today's podcast really is of interest to the issuers because we're going to talk about a few things with Reg.A crowdfunding. Obviously, Reg.A has a lot of moving parts, and one of them in particular is this whole testing the waters option that issuers can do. And I got to tell you, Manuj, when I first learned about this, I thought this was a no-brainer. I thought, this is such a great option for issuers. But then I also heard the opposite. There's actually a school out there that think that may not be that great. But what's your take on the whole thing? Let's talk about this again from a real top level.
Well, if I can give you some context of who I am and how I perceive things, and maybe that would add a little more meat to the conversation. So I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. We're business owners. My father was an immigrant that came to North America, Canada specifically, not seeing an opportunity, getting a job to start a business. And that is a common story, not common American, Canadian, North American story, where necessity breeds innovation. So most people do things because they have to. And as a result, many entrepreneurs are really, let's say, we define them as risk takers. Their risk tolerance is much higher. They jump into opportunities, and basically it's a sink or swim type of mentality. However, it does not mean that you don't do your research. It does not mean that you do not evaluate the benefit of or evaluate the opportunity to see is it worth it or not. And given the market today, given the current situation we're in, it actually is more important to do your research, to look at what the opportunity is. Is there a market for you? Is there a product market fit for what you want to do? And I think that's where the value of testing the waters comes in, because if you specifically talk about Reg.A, Reg.A capital raising is expensive. And expensive because there's so many costs of overhead, meaning from legal to financials to marketing to administrative, and it's literally doing a full-time job. So there's actual labor costs of the individual raising the funds themselves and working on this. So I think the value of testing the waters is doing the due diligence up front to evaluate if there is this opportunity. And instead of getting into the tens of thousands of dollars of expenses that a Reg.A requires and not knowing the potential of success, you actually get to mitigate that risk by doing some more homework in advance. And that's what this opportunity allows.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of people think when it appears to be easy that they can do everything, but I think that's where people make their mistake. You can't do everything, and this is a time where you need experts to help you to make sure you're successful because, as you said, it's very expensive.
It is.
100% agree.
Yeah. And Manuj, the idea behind the whole testing the waters as well is setting up some kind of a platform or some kind of a thing on your website which allows people to pledge interest. Is that right? Can we explain that a little bit more?
Well, so essentially what it is you as an issuer or assessing, is there, as I said earlier, product market fit? Are there people interested in your offering? Well, even to take a step back, you're not, unless you're qualified by the SEC, you cannot offer stocks or sell any securities or even talk about the price points of what your program is. But essentially, you're allowed to gauge, is there interest in your company, and you're allowed to generate lead lists or potential investor lists, but you cannot solicit them to sell them something. I hope you understand how I'm differentiating the two. During an actual campaign, once you're qualified by the SEC, you're allowed offering the offer, presenting the offer. You can talk about the opportunity. You talk about the price. You can talk about the potential return. During testing the waters, you can't do that. But what you can do is test and evaluate, is there an opportunity for me to raise money? Is there a buyer out there who'll be interested in my story? And if there are, okay, what messaging will work for them? Most people think that they'll make a video, have a nice attractive video, have a nice pitch, nice ads, that's colorful banner ads, and expect that people will bite. In reality, it's not 100% guaranteed, right? So in technology, we talk about something called A/B testing. I mean, you try to get from point A to point B and test the path to get there. You do the same thing with using testing water rules, and you get to test, does it work? Is my messaging working? Maybe you have to do some tweaks and changes, and then change the messaging, and maybe the second time, the third time, it works better at a much lower cost. And then, as you talked about pledging interest, if there are individuals out there that like your concept, like your messaging, you're allowed to collect their information to communicate with them. And then once you get qualified by the SEC, you can solicit them for their investment.
Interesting. So now when these lists are made, let's say you do a testing the waters campaign and you generate a list of, let's say, 1,000 people as an example. Now all of a sudden you realize, this may work. I think we're going to go forward with this program, with this capital raise. Does it matter where your name is on this list in terms of your ability to invest? I mean, does the thousandth person get the same shot as the first person?
I would think so. I would say so, because the idea is that you're offering the same. Like when you do a offer circular with the SEC, the deal you're offering, it's offered the same to everyone, right? So the idea would be is that now you have, instead of starting from zero and starting from scratch once you get qualified, you have a running start. And the hope is you're offering the same people everything across the board. So I've noticed some people do different deals depending on the level of investment they do. That would cause a huge problem on your cap table and how you would structure the different transactions, or different types of share levels. So I would recommend just doing across the board standard deal for everyone, and maybe have a little kicker like you do in Kickstarter, that if you invest, you might get a product or a service or some bonus on top of it, and so keep it simple and to the point.
Incentives always work, make it easier for you to do what you're doing if you offer an incentive to get people to buy into it. So it sounds like testing the waters basically is just creating your strategy so that you know what's going to work, you know what's not going to work, and if plan A didn't work, you've got a plan B to go to, and you've learned during the process how to adapt to what's going to work and what's not going to work. So when you get to the SEC level, you've got a well-rounded product.
I would agree on what you're saying on a high level, but the way I would say it's a risk mitigating process. It's right. Like, for example, if you're doing a traditional PP, private placement, you give an investor looks at your pitch deck and does their due diligence. Does this fit my investment profile? Am I comfortable with the risk? At the same time, a company has to do the same thing, looking at, okay, I'm going to raise money using either a Reg.D, Reg 506C, Reg CF, or any of these exemptions. Is there a buyer out there? Are there people willing to invest in my story? And am I ready to spend these dollars to achieve this? So I implore everyone to actually do their homework. Sometimes there's something that you and I would like because we find it so cool, but doesn't mean there's a market for it, right? Right. I'm not investing, you're not investing in it. So of course everything's cool if we're not putting our money to it. But if an organic company's bread and butter livelihood is dependent on this, it's in their best interest for their existing investors and any future investors to establish, hey, is there a market for what I'm trying to do? Are there and the cool part for Reg.A is you can actually, the whole idea is to find an audience that can potentially be a brand ambassador as well, right? So not only they're investing in your product, but they can consume at the same time. So it actually makes twice as much sense to do the extra homework, because not only you're identifying your investor profile, but also a consumer profile that'll you'll benefit 2 in 1. That's what I think.
Well, yeah, exactly, because in testing the waters, you're figuring out not only is there a market for what I have and what I want to do, but also eliminating who it's going to appeal to. Between you and Ron and I, we may like one thing, but 2 of us may not like another thing, but by eliminating the 2 of us that don't like it, you now can create more of a focus on who or what type of investor is going to be interested, so you can focus on that type of investor so you're not wasting time and energy and money with people who you know from the start aren't even going to be interested.
Well, Vicki, let me give you a real perfect example, because this is how we started our conversation. I like beer. I like pools. I like warm weather. But I'm not coming to Vegas at 150 degrees.
So we eliminate you from our tourist list, right?
Exactly. So if you were thinking, if I was being tested the waters, being enticed to come to Las Vegas with those 3 features, individually, yes. Together at 115 degrees, no.
No.
Right. So therefore, if I was pitching somebody an opportunity to come to Vegas right now, I would not be the ideal target. As a result, you've done your due diligence, and exactly. You know that there may or may not be a market for me at this time. At 98 degrees, yes, I would be the first one on the airplane to show up to Vegas.
So
but not
for
100%.
10 months out of the year, you would be the perfect person, but for those 2, you just don't want to have anything to do with it.
Exactly.
But you,
that's a great
know
point.
this information, and this information is valuable to you in how you want to present your marketing plan or how you want to go forward, because the more information you have, the better decisions you can make and the better your strategy will work out in the end.
The way I look at it is there's a decision map or decision tree you have to make. With the advantage testing waters, you have other 3 options. A, you test it, you do your testing the waters, it's a surrounding success, you move forward. 2, you do the testing of waters and it fails. Then you have the choice to either pivot, go back to the drawing board, refine the messaging, identify, do a better job in your communication, in your concept, and then try again. And if it works, then you basically go back to A and just move forward. Or 3, option C, is basically you fail and decide, okay, there is no market for this product or concept, and we just end it there. We just bite the bullet, absorb the loss, and take our licks and just move on. So it's like you said, it is information and data is extremely important because now you have 3 decisions to make, and each of them have a different financial implication.
Exactly.
Yeah, so Manuj, what are we talking about on a time frame of testing the waters? How long does a testing the waters campaign, if you want to call it that, last?
There's no rules about it. Like, for example, you can test the waters with the limited information and with some warning labels about advising people that you're not soliciting them for investments until you get qualified. So if you're qualifying, takes 60 days, takes 90 days. You're unlimited to how long you want to do this. It's only how much you want to invest into it. But I want to go back to something you said earlier, Ron, in our conversation before we started, that there's different thought patterns. Some people believe in testing in the waters and others do not. What I would like to add is that there's no single formula of how to doing it. For example, there's exemptions like regulated CF. You can submit for a Reg CF campaign and consider that a testing the waters type of opportunity because it is much more dependent on the issuer, a much lower cost. You can still communicate the message and get investments in and do your A/B testing. And so if, for example, if you are willing to take the time and investments in doing a Reg CF and consider that your testing a waters campaign and then see if there's an appetite for it and you do raise money and therefore you've not only done A/B testing, you've raised some money and now that those dollars could A, cover the costs for the Reg CF as well as allow you to transition to a Reg.A if that is part of your plan. And so as a result, you're basically recovering some costs and moving forward and then starting your Reg.A. Whereas for others, if you're not interested in doing a Reg CF campaign at all, then basically define, okay, what's your timeline, what's your budget based on that timeline, and from there do your A/B testing, see if there's a market for your product.
Yeah, we call it the bridge to Reg.A. You know, you start off with the Reg CF and you go, just as you said, we see a lot of companies doing that. So that's a good point as well.
Yeah, and I've heard that, sorry, just really quickly, Vicki, before you say your next comment, is that now I've heard that the potentially increasing the Reg CF to $5 million, that may be a very appealing opportunity, except that you're restricted to being on a platform, but at least if the limit's high enough, you can actually invest enough dollars to get a good ROI.
Correct. Yep. Vicki, what were you going to say?
What I was going to ask, Manuj, are there certain businesses or companies or industries that just this Reg.A is just not something that's going to work for them based on either not just on whether or not they can afford it, but on what they're trying to do or what they're trying to get investors for? Do you ever say no to companies that come to you because you know that it's just not going to work for them?
Yes, we do. And the reason why this is not only actually, it's a very good question you've asked. And the reason why is I'm a salesperson. I always like to make people please people. And the hardest lesson I ever learned was to say no. And especially in a Reg.A environment where the marketing aspect is basically the engine that makes this go, if we say yes to every opportunity without doing our due diligence, will this be a success? We're not only disservicing the client just to take their money, but we're actually putting ourselves in a risk because there's a potential reputational risk of not able to be succeeding, and therefore our reputation is in line of the failure rather than the issue themselves. Because there's so many moving parts to a Reg.A. Like, for example, we're under COVID right now, and perceptions, financial risk, many things change given the current environment. So without doing proper due diligence and looking at, okay, is this something that will succeed in? Is there a market for it? Is there what dollar point they're on? What is the growth opportunities for this? And will this fit our model of business, as well as are we willing to risk our reputation on this? So there are so many moving parts in the decision making. So, to simplify, to answer your question, yes, we have said no, but there's a lot of points that we have to take into consideration before making that decision.
So if I'm a business and I'm thinking, well, this might work for me, I think I'm going to go forward with it, what would be the first question I would have to ask myself in order to take that first step and know whether it's really going to work?
Is somebody willing to pay for your product or service? You may think that you're solving a problem that applies to you, and it's your personal problem. But if nobody is willing to pay for it, then you don't have a business.
There you go.
So if you don't have a buyer, then what's the point?
That's right.
Exactly.
Well, that's
yes.
right.
Yes.
And you can't expect a miracle.
Yeah.
And
Manuj, getting back to getting back to your point before about saying no to some projects or this and that, I think that's one of the negative things that people bring up about testing the waters, because the negative part of it that I've heard was that if I'm testing the waters and I'm trying to get people interested, then people may like me, and many people might say, hey, I think your idea is great. I think this is great. Proceed. And all the status will be saying, yeah, go ahead. But none of these people are putting money up at this point. But once the time is to come up with some money, then it's a whole different story. And people say, well, I'm not ready to invest or whatever. And then all you're testing the waters, that whole campaign, which gave you a green light go, becomes a red light because none of the people are ready to invest really. So that's the negative end of that, that I've heard. What do you think of that?
Well, that's a very good point. But then imagine you're investing all this money into a Reg.A. So we can do testing the waters without having to spend any dollars on your audit, without having to spend any dollars on legal, because this is basically a trial period. And you get some either positive or negative feedback, and it then allows more of some data to make a decision point. But let's say, for example, you skip all that and go straight into the Reg.A. You spend money on your audits, spend money on your SEC fees, you spend money on the legal fees, any other administrative costs. You're in the tens of thousands of dollars, and you're in the same point where you did not evaluate if there's a market for your product or service, and now you don't have a buyer. But you spent the $100,000 to get it all set up. Whereas you could have spent, let's say, a quarter of that, done the marketing analysis, and still came to the same conclusion, and at least you saved 75%.
Right, and then you're left with those three options you talked about before, the A, B, or C option of whether to proceed or not, or I guess there's a D option there too, which is, I think it's a great idea. I don't care what the data says, which is a recipe for failure.
Well, I'll give you actually a very personal example of the logic, and hopefully it gives your audience a better understanding. So while growing up, my father, who was a very charismatic business person in the early 90s, decided to, in Canada at that time there was no Walmart. And that concept of dollar stores is very, very new. So growing up in the city of Montreal, my family was the very first chain of dollar stores. And it was just a concept. You came to the U.S. on a business trip, and saw this is a great concept. Okay, let me try this out. Because there was nothing else there, it was more of a gimmick at that point. There was it was the right opportune time. So, but eventually, a chain similar to Dollar Tree started up in Canada. Walmart showed up. Some of the major other chains showed up. And as a result, it became tighter. The margins were smaller. Our dollar collapsed, so the cost of buying goods from China went up. And then eventually, it did not make sense. So this was in the early 90s. Unfortunately, my father passed away in 98, and we had we had already gone to another business. We shut that business down, and my mom said, you know what, I have experience in a dollar store business. I want to go back into it. You know, you go back to school, son, and I'm going to take care of this. So she opened up a store. Well, she didn't do a market research. She didn't look at what the best location of the store would be. She just found a place that thought, hey, this is in front of a grocery store. A lot of people walk by here. I should open my store there. It was one of the worst decisions we ever made. Why? Mm-hmm. We put $50,000 in inventory. We signed up a lease for 5 years. It was an expensive lease. We didn't do the market research of what type of market was there, what type of community was there, what product they would like to buy. And as a result, that grocery store shut down after 2 years, and then a few other stores opened down the street. So now we're in for about $150,000, and we're bleeding. So eventually we had to shut down with our tail behind our legs and just get out of there. But if we actually did our diligence, we did
so important to do that market research. Yeah.
And but still, at least I had product, I liquidated, I recovered some, and I moved on. Now you're raising securities, you're online, you could bleed money nonstop and still not understand what's going on. It's a different world out there. It's very expensive. It makes sense to just do your homework. And that's what Testing Water Opportunity gives you. Whatever direction you choose at the end of the day, you're now empowered with information and data to make that proper decision.
That's like the golden rule of business and entrepreneurship is you have to do the analytical, you have to do the demographics, you have to gather as much information as you can about what it is you want to do and where it is you want to do it, and make sure that there's a market and there's people who want to pay the money to have it. And if you have all of that information before you do anything, you're kind of more on the road to success than if you did like your mother did and said, this is a nice place, it's by a grocery store, let's do it. And then because you didn't have the information, it didn't work out. So it's what I always say, it's the strategy, and the strategy is gathering the information. The more information, the more detailed that information is, the more success you will have, because you know what's going to happen. You've anticipated everything.
Like they always talk about having greener pastures on the other side of the fence. It's not always true. You need to do your research. You need to do your homework.
Absolutely. It's full of weeds.
Yeah. Well, Manuj, I'm sure we have issuers on listening to this right now, listening to the podcast, that may want to talk to you further about this point and get started with some marketing. How would they get a hold of you? What's the best way to reach you?
Well, I'm given that we're all working from home. I'm always on my phone, so I always have my email and my phone number. If you allow me to, can I give them? Can I state out my email, my phone number, and they can give me a call?
Yeah, whatever you like. Yeah, that's
so fine. So my email is Manuj, which is MANUJ at plexus.media. So MANUJ at PLEXUS.media, MEDIA. Or just give me a quick call on my cell phone, which is the area code 647-938-9676.
Yeah, hopefully you have a nice view of the outside your office window there at home, and you get the nice relaxing view as you work, right?
Well, what I live in a suburb north of Toronto, so I've tried to make a little background oasis. I'm growing my little tomato plants. Actually, I'm also growing a Carolina Reaper pepper plant, which is regarded the hottest pepper in the world. So that's some of the gardening experimenting I'm doing. So I wake up in the morning, sun shining, have a coffee, work out in my backyard, and then when it gets really hot and muggy, I go in my basement and have my little TV, got the computers going, and nice AC running. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, maybe
see what the virus did to you, Manuj? It made you a farmer.
Well, actually, the problem with the viruses for me is that I've been gaining weight because I've been literally eating more. That's because usually when you're working, you go to the office, there's transit, you're busy with calls and meetings, people face to face. Here, I'm on the phone and walk to my kitchen, take out a bag of chips or a bag of popcorn or cookies, and basically realize, why am I spending more on groceries? I thought I was going to save money sitting at home. So it's positive and negative.
But the good news, Manuj, is that hot peppers are good for you if you want to lose weight, because they motivate your metabolism. So that's a good thing. So you're growing what you need to overcome the cookies and the popcorn.
True. But what I've heard about the Carolina Reapers is that they actually burn the inside of your mouth, so you literally can't eat anything anymore. So I think that could also be a reason for it.
Whatever works, Manuj.
I think Manuj, maybe we should do a testing the waters on your pepper recipe there. Who knows, right? One of these days we'll see it on the shelves in the stores, right?
Not a problem. Actually, I'm the chef at home, so I cook. Like I bought myself a pizza oven. I love smoking food, and my mom says to me, "Why don't you just open a restaurant?" It's like, if I have to earn a living cooking food, I'll just stop doing it because it'll be no longer fun. So here's my promise to you: once I have these peppers ready, I'll make a spicy jam, and I'll send it to the two of you for testing it out.
Perfect.
Very good. I'm in.
We will test it.
So, Vicki, did we leave anything out? Is there anything we didn't ask Manuj?
Well, Manuj, I think you did an excellent job, and you got people to think about not everything works for everybody, and most important, whatever you're doing, do your homework and let somebody actually help you to make a success. And I think that's one of the things that you put forth very well, Manuj, that if you call Plexus Media, talk to Manuj, you're on the road to success.
I thank you both for this opportunity and having me back. I really, really do enjoy it. Thank you.
Yes, as well. We love having you on. Hopefully we'll get you on again real soon. So everybody out there, thanks, Vicki, by the way, for co-hosting. Thanks, Manuj, for being part of the show. And you're listening to the Mappable USA podcast at MappableUSA.com. If you go to that homepage, you can scroll down. You can find all our syndication sources. You pick the one you like the best, and you'll never miss another episode. There's a guest tab there. If you want to be a guest like Manuj was today, you can fill that out. We'll see what we can do about getting you on the show. And if you like what you hear today, just send us an email, info@MappableUSA.com, or leave a comment on the page you're listening to this right now. We really appreciate it. Everyone, thanks so much for your support. Thanks for listening. We'll be at you next week with another Mappable USA podcast. Have a great week, everyone.